You hear a very consistent message from Congressman Ron Paul. He does make the point. He is second in delegates right now. He is second in delegates right now as we move on to a more crowded calendar. He is second in delegates right now. He is second in delegates right now.
Ron Paul is the only guy that has any kind of philosophy that I don't know if he could put it into practice. You put so much on the head of state. Well, yeah, he wants to do this, but you can't because you get the Congress and But Ron Paul, I registered Republican to vote for Ron Paul in the last primaries, which was very much like it's like coming out of the closet when you're not really gay.
If you had to vote for a Republican candidate in 2012, which one would it be? No slippery answers. First of all, it's the Young Turks. We don't do slippery answers. So the answer is Ron Paul. It's not even close. First of all, because the other guys are hideous. Now, I disagree with Ron Paul on about half the stuff. He wants to get rid of 5 departments, including education. No way I agree to that. He wants to get rid of the income tax, which sounds crazy to me, okay? Auditing the Fed is fantastic. Getting rid of the Fed, that's a little tricky, right? But on half the stuff, he's actually, honestly, better than the Democrats. On civil liberties, he's not in favor of indefinite detentions or warrantless wiretapping. He's against the Patriot Act. On the wars, getting out of Iraq, Afghanistan, he's much better than the Democrats. So, I mean, I don't think he'll be able to get rid of the income tax, and if he's elected, well, we might get on 50% of the issues things that are right.
So, what do you think about Ron Paul?
I think Ron Paul is a very sensible man. His overwhelming belief in the Constitution is more important to me than whatever religious beliefs that he has to have. It's fine with me. That doesn't bother me because his belief in the Constitution and his belief in what America really should be, that we shouldn't be the police of the world, that we shouldn't be wasting all our resources in all these different countries, that we should be strengthening up our country, our inner cities, our structures, our business, our manufacturing. Pull all that resources in and stop giving it to all these fucking gigantic war companies. Because that's what they are. They're war profiteers. And the war profiteers have hijacked the whole system. And the pharmaceutical companies have hijacked the fucking drug laws so that there's a disproportionate amount of people that want things that are in jail because they want them, because they're not sanctioned by the government. And they become non-violent drug offenders when, they could just get the prescription pill for them and they'd be just as fucked up and fine. They can't choose to do what they want to do. The whole package is bought and sold. So when you step in, if you're a president, a presidential candidate, who the fuck you are, man, good luck. Good luck fixing this mess. Good luck fixing this tangled fishing line.
It's pretty amazing watching the debates and anybody that speaks that besides Ron Paul, it's like total bullshit. Everybody, just nothing but bullshit. And then Ron Paul, that's like a real dude who's breaking it down. Yeah. Honestly, he his whole drug policy, that takes big balls to come out like that with his drug policy, you know what I mean?
Well, there's evidence in other countries. Portugal, less people are addicted to drugs, less people are involved in prostitution because they made it legal. They made drugs legal. They just said, fuck it, let's just decriminalize the whole package.
That's what Ron Paul wants to do.
So it should be, man. You can't nanny state the fucking world. Keep it from your kids. Keep it from your communities. And if people are selling it, if they're pushing it, if you feel like, you can keep them out of your community, man. They're criminals. You should get rid of them. But for people who have it, let them do whatever the fuck they want, man. Let them do whatever they want. That's how it should be. If they're not hurting you, let them do it. Let them do everything. Let them try heroin. I think it's stupid. You want to do it? Go ahead. I support it. I don't want my kids to do it. I'm going to try to educate them as much as possible. Stay the fuck away from heroin. But ultimately, they can get it. They can get it anyway.
Who are you going to vote for?
Ghostbusters.
No, that's who you're going to call. Brian.
Vote for him also.
Herman Cain, just for a goof.
Not Ron Paul?
I think the whole thing's rigged. Yeah, I'll vote for Ron Paul. Sure, I'll vote for Ron Paul. But, Ron Paul is probably not going to get into the position to be the Republican nominee. So I have to register as a Republican, which is just gross.
Do you think they're going out of their way, the media, to ignore him?
Sure, of course they are. I saw one show, this was the most hilarious version of it. They were talking about how Mitt Romney at the time and Rick Perry were battling out for the 2nd and 3rd spot. They're so battling out for number 2 and number 3, and then they started going into this whole battle between number 2 and number 3 and what Mitt Romney needs to do, what Rick Perry needs to do, all the while ignoring Ron Paul because he was number 1. They didn't even talk about Ron. They just talked about these two dudes battling out for 2 and 3 and who's going to emerge.
Why do you think the media is ignoring him?
Because he's not media-centric. He doesn't do anything that all these giant corporations want. Everything that he says is like utopia, dream state where the military-industrial complex doesn't really have control over Congress and the politicians and everyone at the top of the heap. But they really do. They really do. So what happens when he gets in place? What happens when they put him in office and then they go, we're going to do what? We're going to get out of Afghanistan? The fuck we are. Sit down, dude. And then what happens?
That's exactly what's going to happen.
Does he go on TV and tell it, everybody? They were just going to get him killed. I mean, what's going to happen then? Is it going to be revealed that we actually live in a 100% complete police state? And now, unfortunately, because of Mr. Paul's death, the bullshit facade gets dropped and we just fucking march people into camps?
I don't like how people vote. They vote like, well, that guy's never going to win. So that's not a good reason to not vote for a guy like that, I feel. I'm not telling you how to vote. I'm not trying to be a dick like that, but like, I will vote for a guy like that because I want to encourage more people, more crazy people to run. We have guys like Ron Paul who are running, who actually say what everybody says in bars, that these corporations are a bunch of corrupt pieces of shit. These bankers need to be regulated. I have no idea what goes on in politics. All I know is that I think they sent a message with JFK, and I think everybody listened. That basically, you can have your little ideas that you want to do, but if you stray too far from the overall deal, you have a convertible limo ride in Dallas coming up. See, this is why I don't talk politics in my act.
And Ron Paul's different than that. He's a humble man. He's a person who truly is affixed to his ideas. He's not influenceable in any way. I just don't see him putting the country at stake.
And what you're saying is you don't think there's anything that the party could offer him. There's no prize for him here. He's not the kind of guy who would go for that.
I think it would be a mistake to try. I mean, this is a person who over time he wasn't even a person as a House member when I was a leadership staffer that we even really went after to try and get his vote. We knew he was going to stand on his own principles. That's why people love him. And in fact, it wasn't really worth trying to make a deal with him because he already had his mind made up.
What about you? What do you think? What about the right of people to be secure in their persons and their houses and effects?
We have that right. The Patriot Act, in fact, you should ideally be against the Patriot Act like Ron Paul is, because part of the Patriot Act is they could look at your gun records. They could look at your library records. They don't even need a name or attached to a search warrant, and they don't even need probable cause. So I would think if you're someone who favors gun rights, you'd be very much against the Patriot Act. Ron Paul is exactly right on this, and I really like Ron Paul, although not in everything as a liberal Democrat, but he's got it exactly right on this, and he's a very important voice in this debate because he is standing up for being free. And once we do sacrifice our safety in the name of freedom, we, as Benjamin Franklin said, deserve neither. And the idea that it almost sounds trite to say the terrorists have won, but they don't take away our freedom, we do.
And so this is where we all have to take some time to pause and reflect. See, Ron Paul leads all other candidates, including President Obama, in donations from the military. That includes those affiliated with the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and the Marine Corps. And those were some of the hundreds of people that gathered here in Washington today at the Veterans for Ron Paul March.
Ron Paul seems to be the only person that's representing us instead of the defense contractors and bankers.
I don't believe that we should be over in these other countries messing around.
He wants to close the 900 overseas bases that we are funding at a very expensive and growingly more expensive rate there that is bankrupting this country.
Now, we've spoken about the statistics that show that only 1% of Americans are actually fighting our wars for us. Only 1%. And it's not the 1% that are the executives of the big defense contractors or many of the politicians that are calling for endless war and intervention. Of course, there are members of Congress who have served. We have John McCain out there who's always pledging for more war. But don't forget, it's all of Congress that passes the Defense Appropriations Bill every year and funds our conflicts that never even technically get congressional approval to be started. So when much of that 1% that actually does the fighting and their families who feel the sacrifices hit closest to home, when they support the candidate that asks us to be sensible about our foreign policy, to end the wars, to bring the troops home, then it deserves to be discussed. The rest of us can't just go on being apathetic to our policies of aggression when those that have experienced them, carried them out, are actually calling for our attention. Now, the mainstream media, well, of course they didn't cover this march today. They ignore our wars and their consequences, and we point that out on a daily basis here. But These news organizations that play up their respect for the troops only when something horrible happens, a deadly firefight, a helicopter crash, or on Veterans Day itself. They should be ashamed that they ignore what our veterans are telling us on a daily basis. They should be ashamed that they normally choose to miss.
I think he's honest, you know, and I think he has some very interesting ideas. I think his problem is that this campaign system that we have is really designed to produce candidates who fall within a certain range of acceptable opinions, and you can pretty much define that as Dennis Kucinich on one side and Ron Paul on the other side. If you have anything that's kind of falls out of the box, you know, abolishing the Federal Reserve, setting up a Department of Peace, you're going to be bullied relentlessly by everybody, especially the press. And you know, I watched Ron Paul in South Carolina. Every time reporters got near him, the only thing that they could ask him was, which of the other three candidates would you endorse? You know, which of the real candidates basically would you throw your support to? And voters pick up that it becomes like the background of all the press reports about Ron Paul, that this guy's not a real candidate. He's sort of a novelty, and therefore people shouldn't vote for him. And you know, if you look at the polls, he actually does better against Obama than all of them in a head-to-head race. So it's strange that he's been sort of cast aside the way he has. If you look at the polls, he actually does better against Obama than all of them.
Right. Did you see the poll? I think it was just yesterday, which was a poll of Republicans against Barack Obama. It showed that only Ron Paul had the lowest number here. It was below 20%. The others were all above 20%. 20% of their own Republicans would vote for Barack Obama. That has to make the White House very happy and the Republican establishment very worried.
Well, it has to make every Republican, Tea Party, establishment, everybody's worried about that one. But again, you know what? You see this reflected in Republican numbers. Republicans have never been satisfied with this field, Judge.
Right.
And you know what? This is something I think that you'll resonate to. Why do you think Ron Paul performs well in every race? He hasn't won, but he is there in every race, Judge. Why? Because there are Republicans and there are libertarians who say, you know what, this party is not speaking to me. I don't see people who really are going to shake up the status quo. I want someone who's going to speak in my voice, and they are gravitating to Paul. And I think there are a lot of those Republicans and libertarians who, when they look at the rest of the Republican field, say, you know what, I don't see anybody here that knocks my socks off.
Do you think that Jim DeMint is right to say Republicans cannot write off libertarians, and Rick Santorum is wrong to say I don't want to have anything to do with the libertarians?
Oh my gosh. Again, just from a hardball political angle, that's cutting off your nose to spite. That's saying I enjoy losing, and I will lose to prove my point. What is that about, Judge?
Got it.
Jim, who's best for the U.S. economy, Romney, Santorum, or Obama?
Of those three? None of the above. Are you kidding? Those guys don't have a clue what's going on. They all have made a mess of it so far, and they'll just make it worse. No, none of the above.
Which candidate will be better for America, in your view?
Oh, the only one that understands what's going on, the ones that are running, are, you know, Ron Paul certainly understands, but none of the others do. None of the others have a clue. They're all part of the same problem. They made the problem. Why would we think that those guys who made the problem can now solve the problem?
Okay, we'll continue on. First, I just want to get your take in terms of Ron Paul, in terms of veterans that support him marching in Washington today. Do you think that that means that we should really start taking notice, of that should cause some reflection when you have the candidate perhaps is the most anti-war, right, calling for all of our aggression to stop, and he's the one that has so much support from the troops?
Well, I don't necessarily think it's the end of aggression per se. I think it's focusing on what we need to do as a country. I'm a Reagan Republican, and one of the things notable I'd like to believe is Ronald Reagan understood to not get us bogged down in large land conflicts. Lebanon was a perfect example of that. So I think what I've seen of Ron Paul's policy, it is much more common sense relating to what are the real threats we have to deal with to defend our nation, not become an empire. And I think Bruce could talk about that in greater detail.
I think it's worse than what you suggested, because when you have a government that exists at present that can't even define what victory is in Afghanistan, how can you send people to die, to risk that last full measure of devotion, to spend $130 billion a year on an enterprise you can't even define what the goal is? I mean, that's self-evident. I think that Ron Paul is the only one that understands that the constitutional foreign policy enshrined by the Founding Fathers was captured in billions for defense, not 1 cent for empire. We should devote 100% of our military resources and personnel in defending Americans on American soil. Other than that, we need to let the other parts of the world fend for themselves. We promise retaliation if they attack. And it's not because the world will necessarily be perfect. But the idea that the United States is morally and otherwise responsible for everything that moves, Syria, Yemen, any place, is insane. It would mean we would have to be everywhere all the time.
We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about Syria, too. But first, I want to bring up another thing that Ron Paul said over the weekend, because you have the media obsessing over things that Rick Santorum may have said, right, about President Obama's phony theology here. But, you know, you say that we can't define necessarily why we find ourselves in certain parts of the world. Fortunately, war-making is a money-making industry. Right. And so let's listen to, or actually, I'm going to read it because there's not a clip. Ron Paul at an event in Kansas said, "We've slipped away from a true republic. Now we're slipping into a fascist system where it's a combination of government and big business and authoritarian rule and the suppression of the individual rights of each and every American citizen." Now, is this just more of this rhetoric that we hear of, right? We hear a lot of words thrown out all the time. We hear socialism, now it's fascism, or does he have a point?
Well, I think he has a point, and this is why. We met our military objectives in Afghanistan by 2004. We should have been out of there by 2005 because we had defeated materially the adversary we want to get after. We'd taken out all the terrorism leadership to the point of where anybody who participated in that in the attacks pretty much were gone or within the range of capture. With that said, that was a special operations war. It was always special operations war. But others decided we're going to make it a counterinsurgency, which became a conventional war, which entailed billions of dollars being invested in there to make them like us. So why did we do that? There was no military necessity to do that. Therefore, I do think it's a valid point that we've made these expenditures without any interest of achieving military objectives.
But I think
fascism, though, you think that's a good word?
But fascism, in some sense, is understated. Remember this: the President of the United States has announced that he claims constitutional power to assassinate, I underscore assassinate, any American, anywhere, anytime, any place, based upon secret facts, secret law, and no post-mortem. The President of the United States has signed a bill called the National Defense Authorization Act that empowers him to send the military to your home, to mine, to Tony's, to any viewer's home, and say, we think that you're connected, you're linked to some hostile forces against the United States. We're not telling you why. We're taking you to Guantanamo for life. No accusation, no charge. That is beyond fascism. That is dictatorship. And this is not an exaggeration of what Ron Paul has stated. Now, with regard to spying, one of the most precious things we enjoy in the United States under the Constitution is the right to be left alone. The government isn't authorized to snoop into everything that we do or say. And we live right now. That's exactly what they do. They, without warrants issued by judges, spy and retain any information that you've left with Google or Yahoo or any place. You don't know what's done with it. You don't know what's leaked out. The idea of the right to be left alone is a joke these days. And lastly, to show you how bad this has become, at the outset of the war against Afghanistan, it was said we have to fight them abroad so we don't have to fight at home. Now, Senator Lindsey Graham, in defending the National Defense Authorization Act, says we are bringing the battlefield where? Here, home, to D.C.
Now homegrown terrorism.
No, that's right, the homegrown terrorism.
But what do you think, though? I mean, do you think that kind of rhetoric actually works? Does it get the crowd riled up? Is that going to get voters to come to you, right? Because if you look at what the media is covering today, it's not what Ron Paul said this weekend. It's about whether Obama is a Christian or not, or whether Rick Santorum was actually talking about environmentalism and who, whatever his excuse was.
Well, I think that's the issue we all have to face is what is the mainstream media really picking up on? This is all law now. What Bruce just said is law. And this goes beyond, when I was doing Able Danger, one of the things I'm famous for, we fought to retain basic data from a variety of sources, and we were said, oh, there may be U.S. person information in there. Now the prism's gone completely to the side to the point of where no one's questioned the assassination of Anwar al-Awlaki and his son, 2 U.S. citizens. And beyond that, there are at least 4 other U.S. citizens, not foreign nationals, U.S. citizens on the kill capture list. Who put them on there? How did they get on there? What is the justification to have them on there? So this is my concern as a military officer who's done this sort of thing, that we have gone beyond the pale of not caring about the fact that there's a secret, a secret star chamber, if you will, that someone can determine if they don't like you, they think that maybe you're just not American enough, you could be on that list and be assassinated and no one's going to say anything.
It's very scary.
Well, it seems the mass media has officially given up on one Republican presidential candidate, Ron Paul, who has consistently attracted a very passionate and dedicated following, reportedly has had only one embedded reporter throughout the entire campaign. And now he apparently has none because MSNBC pulled the sole embed off the bus. This proves that for mainstream reporters, Ron Paul just isn't worth their time. Now, when you see video of Paul, he usually is swarmed with a very energized fan base, yet he hasn't won a single caucus yet. And this has the candidate raising suspicion.
Because sometimes we get thousands of people like this, and we'll take them to the polling booth, and we won't win the caucus. So, you know, a lot of our supporters are very suspicious about it. But the straw votes have been very confusing. I mean, you've probably read in the paper about what happened up in Maine. I mean, there's just a lot of confusion. They said, well, let's have a recount. They said, well, we can't have a recount. They just write these numbers down on pieces of paper, and we throw them away afterwards. So it's that kind of stuff that makes you suspicious.
So is there an effort to silence Paul, and is the candidate not getting a fair shot in the race to be the next Republican presidential candidate? Well, to dig deeper into what's really going on here, I'm joined now by Mary Willison, volunteer organizer for the Los Angeles Liberty headquarters and Ron Paul supporter from our LA studios. Welcome to the show, Mary. So would you say that the media is actively biased against Ron Paul?
Completely. They're doing absolutely everything in their power to give less coverage and make him seem unelectable. The media is the one who started the whole rumor of unelectability, and actually Ron Paul is highly electable, and that's why they're not covering him. He's drawing crowds of, you know, 3,000 to 5,000 on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times daily. He'll have a conference in one place and then, you know, fly over to another. And yesterday spoke to a crowd of more than 5,000 in Illinois and took them to the polls right afterward. And the media can't cover those sort of things because, you know, they are the kind of government-sponsored organizations that get taxpayer bailouts. GE, the parent company of the CNBC, got over $182.5 billion in taxpayer bailouts. And, you know, Ron Paul does not support bailouts, and that's why.
Now, I kind of want to pull up an example of this. This was a poll that was on CNN where Ron Paul, he was ranked the highest in this poll at 52%. So significantly higher than some of the other candidates there. Yet, if you see, he's all the way on the bottom there. So that just doesn't really seem to make much sense off the bat. What do you make of that, and when else would this ever happen?
Yeah, only when Ron Paul wins would the winner be listed at the bottom of the page. And we saw much worse than that, much more blatant attempts. You know, in almost all of the debates, you know, we would have a debate watching party, and you would see that the way that the camera was framed, they would put the other three candidates in the, you know, together and put Ron Paul off to the edge, and the camera would frame on just the three candidates as if Ron Paul wasn't even in the room on the same stage. And in one debate, he only had 89 seconds to speak, and in another one, I think it was an hour and a half debate, and they cut off the second half hour where Ron Paul had the opportunity to speak. So.
And here's somebody that is trying to shine light on this, none other than Jon Stewart. Let's take a listen.
A new Gallup survey showing Rick Perry running second to Mitt Romney, knocking down Iowa favorite Michelle Bachmann to fourth.
Behind who? Fourth behind who? How did Libertarian Ron Paul become the 13th floor in a hotel?
So, Mary, why would there be this effort to silence him? Why? What is the motive behind ignoring him?
Exactly as I mentioned, you know, Ron Paul, you know, he's not the establishment candidate. He does not represent the things that that benefit these big corporate government-sponsored organizations and the corporatocracy. You know, Ron Paul is, you know, the exact opposite. He's the patriot for the people, and you know, that's why they don't give him any coverage, because he actually can win. They like to misreport on his delegate wins. They like to misreport on his caucus wins and the size of them. So, you know, nobody gave him any credit for winning the caucus in the Virgin Islands. And that's just insane. So if they want to call Mitt Romney the winner for winning 8 delegates in the Virgin Islands, then I guess that we can call Ron Paul the winner in Maine, Nevada, Colorado, where he took all the delegates, the majority.
Earlier, we played a clip there of Ron Paul. He was raising suspicion of election fraud, and he pointed to the fact wherever he goes, he is surrounded by so many of these very vocal, passionate people, and you don't see this kind of following for the other candidates. Yet at the same time, he hasn't won any caucuses, and to him and to many of his followers, something doesn't add up. Do you think that there is fraud going on?
I think that the establishment GOP has been told which candidate and has a candidate that in mind, and they're pushing forward for those candidates. You know, Mitt Romney is the establishment choice, and doing whatever they can to steal away Ron Paul's momentum. If they had declared him the winner in the U.S. Virgin Islands, as he was, rightfully so, then that would just help to propel him into the next states and keep things going for Super Tuesday. But they did not want to give him that win. And, you know, by doing that, it kind of quelches his momentum. And, you know, supporters sometimes fear, you know, throwing a vote away. If some people are very loyal to the Republican Party, and they fear that, you know, I'm not sure why, that if they gave it to the other candidate, but you know, in most cases, or as I feel it, they would be throwing their vote away if they gave it to the lesser of two evils rather than to the one candidate who's actually standing up for them.
Now, in terms of election fraud, Mary, do you think that could indeed be going on?
I think it's a possibility, and you know, a lot of the Ron Paul supporters who've showing up to the caucuses to participate and to become delegates have been turned away. There's been a lot of rumors about it. I'm not on the ground, and I'm not with the official campaign. I'm a grassroots supporter, but there is definitely a lot of information that comes out of some of these, and we've informed the voters to participate in the caucuses and to be a part of the public tally, that people can call for a public tally of the vote. And when they've done that, I think it was in Iowa, you know, they reported that, you know, they had counted out the public votes, and then it was, you know, those results were not even turned in by the GOP. You know, in Maine, where 84% of the vote was counted, and several precincts and counties were not counted, their votes, you know, and they claimed Mitt Romney as the winner with only, I think, 117 votes apart from Ron Paul. So
now, whether it's an accident or
in other precincts.
Whether it's an accident or if it was intentional, it is raising some suspicion among Ron Paul followers. I do want to pull up a quote from an editorial. This is in the Daily Bell. It says, quote, it is time for a groundswell of Ron Paul supporters to quietly, respectfully, but firmly make their position clear to the mainstream media and the GOP establishment. Simply put, no Paul on the ticket means no vote for the GOP in November. Now, Mary, do you think that that's what needs to be done in order for him to be taken seriously, for some of his followers to put their foot down and say, hey, we can impact the outcome of this election?
You know, I don't know how to answer that question. I'm unsure of how a third-party ticket would run. I think I don't think that people don't want. You know, that's a tough question. I think that Ron Paul is on the Republican ticket because there's finances there to run up against Obama. I think that people would be doing themselves an incredible disservice if they don't vote for Ron Paul, because in my opinion, the other candidates have no chance of winning this race against Barack Obama, because these other candidates support everything that Barack Obama has done wrong since he's been in there, as far as bailouts are concerned, increasing the debt ceiling, preemptive
all right, Mary.
wars and things like that.
We're running out of time, but thank you very much. A pleasure to have you on the show as always. That was Mary Willison, volunteer organizer for the Los Angeles Liberty headquarters and a Ron Paul supporter.
Ron Paul, a true American original. The congressman took some time off the campaign trail to get back to his day job, scolding Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke at a hearing on Capitol Hill, wherein Dr. Paul pulled out a piece of a silver dollar, not quite a piece of silver or a nugget of gold, making the case for gold and precious metals and not paper currency. Let's actually hear that, if we can play that for our panel and our audience.
Why couldn't people put this in a mattress and get 4 or 5 times much of the value in a few years? So the record of what you've done in the last 6 years is destroy the value of real money.
Now, the fiscal prudence of putting silver dollars in your mattress notwithstanding, Willie, the thing about Ron Paul is he's incredibly consistent. And we're talking about the future of the GOP during the break. I think there's some part of Ron Paul's message that when it's all said and done and the GOP is giving itself a long, hard look in the mirror after this 2012 race, will eventually come and adopt some of Ron Paul's rhetoric and some of his thinking, because it resonates not only with some part of the young people in this country, but it's a pure message.
If you go to a Ron Paul rally, as I have many times to observe them, there are a ton of young people there, a ton of young people. Now, there are certainly fringe elements. There are pieces of his message that need to be rounded off. But when you're talking about small government, pull back the troops from Afghanistan, these are things that young people listen to. And authenticity. We talked about it with Mitt Romney. This guy is a true believer. He sticks to his message. Even if it bores you, he's going to talk about the gold standard and Austrian economics, and he doesn't care if it puts you to sleep.
For me, one of the most honest moments was the first clip you showed where he's asked, do you see yourself in the Oval Office? And it's like, oh, no, not really. I mean, how honest and authentic is that? I mean, in other words, I'm coming to do this not because of some predetermined desire that, you know, that's part of my ego, zeitgeist, I always like that term, but the fact that I actually believe the country needs to change and move in a different direction and do certain things for its economic future, and that resonates with a lot of people.
What I love about those clips is Ron Paul has a literal interpretation of the Constitution. Yes. He has a literal interpretation of legislation. The words on the page are all you need to know about the meaning. And when he's asked a question, he thinks about it literally. He doesn't answer with some BS politician's approach. He says, well, let's see, do I actually think about being in the Oval Office at night when I'm sleeping? Oh, no.
Well, and when you talk about consistency, the reason he ran for Congress in the first place was to protest the departure from the gold standard. So this is I mean, he was just born and bred on this. And I actually interviewed him one time, and I said, why are you doing this? And he said, you know, I don't want power, I want influence. And I think that he's had an enormous influence on the campaign already.
Absolutely.
So I think he's already won. In his mind, he's already gotten what he wanted. And he's going to keep going.
See some of that rhetoric about the Fed being adopted by a lot of the candidates in the race. Mitt Romney, who has a recurring nightmare, not about the Oval Office, but probably about it being locked when he gets to it.
Paul was a punching bag in 08 in the debates. This time, all the candidates embrace him.
You know, I've kind of come around on Ron Paul, by the way. Not that it makes any difference what I've done, but I sort of like him. I mean, he's got some goofy ideas about some things, but he's got some great ideas about other things.
Well, I think he has mostly great ideas, and next week the rest of the public is going to come around and he's going to take the lead.
But he personally seems charming to me. So
he's a very sweet man.
Do you know him, or you must, huh?
I do. I was amazed. I had him in my show, and I asked, at your age, I forget what it is, you know, what are you bothered by this constant campaigning? He said, I'm only bothered that I can't do my usual exercising. Well, what's your usual exercising? I usually work out twice a day.
That's why it looks like it does. I think he's 76 or 77.
While Ron Paul was speaking, Steve Kornacki, you said he's been offering those remarks for a long time. I'm sorry to pull this out of the locker room. And Michael Steele said, yes, but people are now listening.
Yeah, they are. And it's resonating with a lot of folks. In tough economic times, what he's saying makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting is he's been saying it, as Steve noted, for a very, very long time. And I took away something that was very significant, though. He's talking about cutting $1 trillion out of the budget in 1 year. And you know the old Washington trick, we do it over 10 years. So we like it's $100 billion a year for 10 years. That's nothing. What he's talking about is a fundamental change in the way the government manages its money. And that resonates with a lot of voters out there. And I've said for a long time, and you may disagree with me a little bit on this, I think there's a synergy that Ron Paul has that captures that Tea Party and that Occupy Wall Street-esque feel
that's true.
On the economic side, which is why you see those 20-something-year-olds galvanizing 1,000 college-plus age kids in an auditorium on a Saturday night? Come on.
That's a really important point. I mean, Ron Paul seems to be the only Republican candidate who's really made a play for the youth vote. I mean, he's really done well in Iowa and New Hampshire, for example, among youth voters. So I've been curious to see in terms of Nevada how that helps him in terms of his goal of doing a little bit better in the caucus. You know, the other thing is, in the last election cycle, the Republicans really didn't make the effort to go after the youth vote because there was such the assumption that President Obama would get the youth vote. But what Pew is reporting is that in the course of the last 4 years, young voters, millennials in particular, are becoming more frustrated about the role of government and whether or not. And so I think, you know, Ron Paul's message really resonates. They don't see government working as much as they used to be the most sort of optimistic about.
It sounds like the speech you say he's been delivering a long time. He's going to keep delivering for a long time.
Well, yeah, and I think it illustrates the basic nature of his campaign. In Florida, the most interesting thing to me in the exit poll about Ron Paul was this. They asked people, did you make up your mind in 2011 or in the month of January? Among the people who decided in the month of January, just 3% went for Ron Paul. All of his voters have been with him because they've heard the speech, and the speech resonates with them. And the speech is not strategic in any way. He's not jabbing his opponents. He's not making a pitch for local votes. You know, he is delivering a consistent, it's more of a lecture than a speech. And if he's talking your language, you are going to be with this guy from the beginning to the end.
But despite all this talk of the presumed nominee, which, by the way, has been going on since the beginning of this campaign, there's another candidate that still draws quite a following wherever he goes. Here is Ron Paul at the University of California at Berkeley. About 1,000 students came to hear Dr. Paul speak yesterday to show their support and for them, and it's a sight many people might find surprising. Ron Paul is a Republican, and Berkeley is known throughout history and today as a domain of liberal ideas, of hippies, and the most left-wing people in the country. And look, all these people seem to be pretty happy to be seeing Ron Paul.
I'm a big believer in getting money where the money is, and the money is in Washington.